So I have opened the handbook to the page to the important section why the Indian Ocean matters. So the reason why I do not have my camera on or you do not see my face is because I have some notes pulled up, and if I if I constantly read the notes I will look like I am not interested or not actually invested in sharing this to you, important part to you. So 80% of global oil passes through the Indian Ocean region, so there is a need for protecting energy. So most of the world's oil shipments move to routes in the Indian Ocean region. So energy in this case is oil is used for industries, transport, electricity and military sectors. And there is so much oil that flows through the Indian Ocean region and through these sea routes. So if those sea routes are open and safe, then it will help prevent interruptions in supply chains. Because if those routes are blocked or if there are any delays, then countries that are very reliant on oil will suffer huge shortages. There will be increases in prices and it will be an economic burden to those countries. And this quickly leads to political pressure and it can force governments to make difficult decisions. Most of these decisions are diplomatic, but if diplomatic decisions fail, it can lead to military interventions or even wars. The tankers from the Persian Gulf, East Africa, and from across the world pass through the Indian Ocean to routes to refineries in Asia, Europe, and other continents. So these regions like Persian Gulf or East Africa, they are very huge oil producing regions. So huge amounts of crude oil are loaded onto these huge tankers, and these tankers travel long distances in those sea routes in the Indian Ocean to reach refineries in countries such as India, China, and regions such as Southeast Asia and continents like Europe. So this makes the Indian Ocean a global area for trade in energy and goods. But this also creates huge amounts of traffic in those areas. And this matters because if cargo comes from many directions across the world and it goes to many markets, any issue that happens to these routes can have huge effects to those countries but also to many different continents. Now we will discuss more about any disruptions that occur to these trade routes. So any delays, blockades and attacks on those shipments quickly lead to higher prices, supply shortages and political pressure from countries that import. I've already mentioned this about the consequences that will happen if there is no protection of energy by the Indian Navy for our Indian tankers. Shipping delays or any disruptions like blockades or delay attacks will reduce the amount of oil on the market. And when this reduction occurs, this decreases the amount of supply that is available on the market. And when supply fails, the buyers compete for the oil that is available, and this increases the prices as there is more demand for oil, and the prices is affects our petrol petrol prices change, and the cost of running factories and also heating homes is very costly. And once again, important dependent governments face huge amounts of pressure from consumers and businesses to respond. And this matters because price increases in prices like inflation, they can cause slow growth, and they can even lead to protests. And this may lead to countries to put emergency measures to curb the effects of these prices. They might negotiate with suppliers, and they can even go as far as using their naval power to reopen these routes. So I have talked about the disruptions that occurs, but where do these disruptions occur? These disruptions often occur on narrow passages, or what we call as choke points. Choke points are narrow sea routes or maritime traffic, which is that, as I have said before, the huge amounts of trade in the Indian Ocean region creates huge amounts of traffic, and these choke points are where the traffic occurs, and these choke points are often small areas. So when a single route carries a huge amount of traffic, any issue like a delay, attack, or blockade will affect not just energy but also the trade. And this matters because choke points have huge amounts of traffic. So if any disruption occurs, whether it is by accident or any crime or any attack by any other nation, it will also create a huge risk for supply. So what are these three choke points? First is the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea and holds huge amounts of oil. So very huge amount of oil from the Persian Gulf must pass to the Strait of Hormuz to reach other markets. The Strait of Hormuz is also very narrow, and it is close to huge oil exporting countries in the Middle East, and also in areas where there are huge disputes. So any closure or any threat here will immediately reduce the exports from Gulf countries and increase oil prices. Next is the Bab el Mandeb. The Bab el Mandeb is at the mouth of the Red Sea and is the entrance to the Suez Canal. So ships passing to the Europe and Asia often use the Suez route because other routes around Africa are much longer and more costly. And by blocking Bab el Mandeb, it will force ships to go around Africa. And once again, this matters because any disruption here will lengthen voyages or shipments. It will increase the amount of costs, and it will cause many delays to cargo. Our third checkpoint is the Strait of Malacca. It is known for having huge activity between the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and is necessary for trade between the west and the east. So it is one of the world's busiest trade corridors, and it is very important for its oil and manufactured goods that move between East Asia and Europe. Once again, since it is one of the world's busiest trade corridors, it has huge amounts of traffic. So any accidents or blockages here even from a small ship, will cause huge delays and affect global economies. So, controlling the Hormuz, Bab el Mandeb, and Malacca Strait will influence global trade. Now, let us talk about how traffic is related to disruptions and accidents and how they create chaos. The maritime schedules are very strict and very strong because of so much traffic and so much trade, and there is almost no excuse for even a small error. So ports, oil refineries and supply chains are scheduled by arrival, and these delays are taken seriously. So any tanker, any shipment that arrives late will not be unloaded, and there won't be any fuel deliveries, and you will have to change the production schedules. And this matters because economies run on in-time shipping, meaning that they value the timing in any shipments, and there are narrow, so any brief in disruption can cause any shortages in supply, and these supply shortages will last weeks or months. So this is one of the ways supply can be affected, energy can be affected, oil can be affected, trade can be affected. There are many factors that will be affected if there is any disruption or accident to any choke point or any passage or any trade route. Now these risks are growing. These risks are growing as major powers are expanding their naval influence and building ports, which create new geopolitical rivalries in the Indian Ocean. So nowadays countries invest in naval bases, stations to refuel their ships, and new port infrastructure so that they can support their commercial shipping and project power. So when multiple powers do this in the same region, like China, US, any of those countries, this increases competition, and this competition is for access in the Indian Ocean, to show influence and to have a strategic advantage over other countries in the Indian Ocean. And this naval and infrastructure expansion can change local balances of power. They can create new alliances, and it can go as far as escalating tensions. If a certain country sees another country's presence or influence as a threat to their sovereignty or influence. Now there is another issue that is also part of this, that teaches Bharat why the Indian Ocean matters. Piracy and crime still threaten ship and trade in parts of the western Indian Ocean and the Red Sea. So some areas still remain vulnerable to robbery, hijacking or kidnapping, often by militants or criminal organizations, and which often exploit any weak maritime law enforcement, or they exist from nearby conflicts. You can take Yemen and Somalia as an example, as they have been facing piracy for many years, and they are currently facing very deadly civil wars. And these attacks from piracy and crime increase insurance costs and force ships to reroute or travel with more protection. To be honest, operations against piracy often do not work except for the Indian Navy, because this piracy increases costs in operations, it risks safety of crews, and it can force political or or military responses from states and coalitions that are affected by this piracy and crime. Another issue that is often underrated when discussing the Indian Ocean is climate change. Another issue in climate change, from stronger storms, monsoons, rising sea levels, and damage of corals. All of these cause more disruption to the Indian Ocean and harm coastal communities that contribute to ports and trade. So climate change increases storm intensity and it also changes weather path. So any parts or coastal infrastructure are the most vulnerable to sea level rises and this extreme weather. And coral damage also affects coastal fisheries and the naval protection reefs provide to harbors. So basically, and the nature of the ocean support fisheries and harbors. So any degradation, any damage of corals and reefs have negative effects to these fisheries and harbors, because fisheries are networks that are fishing. So if there's any damage that occurs to reefs or corals, fisheries will be not able to function. And harbors also rely on the environment of these reefs and these corals. So if they are damaged, then harbors may not thrive and they may not be safe. And any parts that are damaged will cause slower loading and unloading of ships. It will be more costly to repair them, and there will not be much capacity. And coastal communities provide labor and services for ports to run. So any damage to these ports will cause them to lose their jobs or daily life, and trading hubs will not function very well. So for India, its location is its destiny. India is geographically closer to the major routes of Indian Ocean trade. It a huge coastline, archipelagos such as Andaman and Nicobar and Lakshadweep. So India is at the center of the Indian Ocean geographically. Its long coastline, so India has a long coastline, Western Ghats or Konkan Bay of Bengal. There are many seas and that surround India, and there are island territories such as Andaman, Nicobar, and its coastline and these island overseas territories or union territories, I should say, are near major commercial routes. They are close to the state of Malacca to the east, the state of Hormuz to the west. So that gives India both a duty to help keep the sea lane safe, because any regional instability will affect India directly. That is why the Indian Navy has a duty to keep the sea lane safe. And this also gives India an opportunity to change and influence regional trade, logistics and investments. So if India invests more in ports, surveillance, naval capacity and regional diplomacy, India can protect its own energy and trade interests while becoming a security provider in the region. And the Modi government has already decided that India will be a security provider in the Indian Ocean region. And by being a security provider, it can give many economic benefits and political influence. So in summary, To summarize all of this, most of the world's fuel flows to the Indian Ocean to many sea lanes, and those sea lanes contain huge amounts of traffic and huge amounts of trade. And these sea lanes in choke points such as the state of Hormuz, Bab al Mandeb, and the state of Malacca. They are very valuable. They are also very, very vulnerable because these choke points face many. The Indian Ocean faces lots of piracy. These choke points face huge amounts of traffic, and any disruption that occurs there, like delays, blockades, or attacks, will affect global prices, trade, supply, and many different factors. And the Indian Ocean faces piracy, climate shocks, I should say climate change, and these risks are real. And for India, which is at the center of these routes, which has a strategic so and India being at the center of these routes isn't just geographically or strategically connected to them, but it is also having the opportunity to protect trade, build prosperity, build peace, and influence the Indian Ocean's future. This is my explanation for why the Indian Ocean matters for you to understand from my handbook. The handbook is available in the description. So if you are interested in reading the full handbook, it is there for you to read. So thank you. In the future I will be explaining more concepts for you to understand. So thank you for watching this.